March 3rd, 1943. In a quiet corner of Berlin, one woman's whispers would travel farther than any bullet ever could. The room smelled of dust and wires, rows of cables hung like vines across the walls, and the low hum of electricity filled the air. In the middle of it all sat Elise Weber, a small, pale woman with steady hands and tired eyes, her hair pinned neatly beneath a headset. She was a switchboard operator for the German High Command, one of hundreds of invisible voices connecting the powerful to one another. Every day she sat at her station, plugging in calls between officers, clerks, and messengers. It was dull work, monotonous, safe, until the day she stopped just listening and started hearing. That morning began like any other. The streets outside buzzed with trams and bicycles. Bomb sirens had not sounded for 3 nights, and Berliners dared to believe the war might finally be tilting in their favor. Inside the switchboard office, Elise's supervisor barked orders over the noise. "Weber, line 6, field command, Munich." She nodded, inserting a plug and pressing a button. "Line 6 connected, sir." The voices came through her earpiece. 2 men, low and hurried. She didn't recognize them, but their accents marked them as officers from the Luftwaffe. "The supply shipment's delayed again," one said bitterly. "Half our trucks are stuck in Poland." The other sighed. "And the men?" "Tired, hungry. No replacements coming. But you can't say that aloud, not unless you want to disappear." There was a pause. Then the first voice whispered, "I heard someone did disappear. Colonel Reinhardt last week said too much about rations." Elise froze. The conversation ended, and she disconnected the line, but the words stayed. Hungry soldiers, delayed supplies, fear of vanishing. It wasn't gossip anymore. It was truth leaking through the cracks. That evening, Elise took her usual walk home. She lived alone in a small apartment above a tailor's shop, her days marked by routine. Coffee, work, silence. But lately she'd noticed more soldiers on the corners, more whispers behind closed doors. At the market, she bought bread from Frau Becker, the woman who ran the bakery stall. The old woman always smiled kindly, though her eyes held something sharper. Awareness, perhaps. "Busy day at the office, Elise?" she asked casually. "As always," Elise said. "The wires never stop humming." Frau Becker leaned closer. "And what do they hum about these days?" It was a harmless question. But Elise hesitated. Finally, she said quietly, "They hum about hunger." The baker looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Funny, isn't it? How the truth finds its way, even when words are rationed. Over the next few days, Elise began to notice more. Officers growing irritable on the phones, arguments between divisions, strange silences after certain names were mentioned. She told herself it was none of her concern. She was just a voice between wires. But each night, when she closed her eyes, she heard those same voices echoing in the dark, angry, fearful, human. And then, one morning, she overheard something that changed everything. It was a Thursday. Snow fell softly against the windows. Elise sat at her station, wrapping her shawl tighter, as she listened to line 8, Berlin to Hamburg. 2 senior officers were speaking in low tones. "Reichstag directives won't hold," one said. "Too much unrest among the factories." "Then suppress it," the other replied. "I can't suppress hunger," the first snapped. "We're losing morale faster than we lose fuel." Then came the sentence that made Elise's heart stop. "Even the officers' wives are whispering. Everyone knows something is wrong. The city runs on rumors now." Rumors. That word echoed in her head. Because that, she realized, was what she had been hearing all along. Not reports, not intelligence, rumors. Fragments of truth, dressed as gossip, passing freely where official secrets could not. And maybe, she thought, that's where real power lies. That evening, Elise walked to the market again. The air was cold, and smoke from the baker's oven drifted through the narrow streets. Frau Becker was there, arranging loaves on her table. "Back for more bread?" the woman asked. Elise hesitated, glancing around. Then she said softly, "The officers are nervous. They're arguing about shortages and about who to blame." Frau Becker's hands froze for just a second before she continued arranging the loaves. "Is that so?" she murmured. "Yes," Elise said. "And they mentioned morale, that even the soldiers are beginning to question things." The baker nodded slowly. "You're hearing what others cannot? That makes you dangerous or useful?" Elise frowned. "Useful to whom?" Frau Becker gave a faint smile. "To the truth." The next day, Elise found something small and folded beneath her doorstep, a scrap of paper wrapped around a button. Inside were 6 words. "Speak again. Same place. Next week." No name, no signature. Her heart raced. Someone had heard her. For the first time, Elise felt something she hadn't felt since before the war. Purpose. Days passed. She returned to work, pretending nothing had changed. But her ears had become sharper. Every careless comment from a general, every sigh from a tired clerk, every whisper about supplies or morale, she stored them like tiny pieces of a puzzle. A missing train here, a delayed convoy there. Officers complaining about rations, about weather, about orders that made no sense. It all added up to something larger, a picture of a crumbling machine. At night, she replayed the voices in her mind, writing down what she remembered on scraps of paper hidden behind her wardrobe. When she met Frau Becker again, the baker listened silently as Elise spoke in low, careful tones. "They say the Eastern Front is colder than expected," Elise said, "and fuel is low. There are arguments about who will get supplies first." Frau Becker nodded. "And who gets none at all?" Elise swallowed. "Many. Too many." The baker wrapped her bread, slipped something small beneath the paper, and handed it over. "For your trouble," she said. When Elise got home, she unwrapped it. Inside the bread wrapper was a small metal pin, a white rose. She had heard the name whispered once before. A quiet network, students, teachers, and workers who fought with words, not guns. Now she was one of them. From that night on, Elise's life changed. Every rumor she overheard became a thread in a secret web. Every word she passed along became a whisper of resistance. She didn't carry weapons. She didn't wear a uniform. But with every coded phrase she slipped to the baker, she fought her own battle, one rumor at a time. And in a war built on lies, truth was the most dangerous weapon of all. March 28, 1943, in the heart of Berlin, the city still hummed with life. But beneath the noise of trams and soldiers' boots, a new sound began to grow. Whispers. Berlin was a city pretending to be strong. The banners still hung high, the parades still marched, and the newspapers still promised victory. But if you listened closely beneath the music and speeches, the city was murmuring, softly, cautiously, like a person talking in their sleep. Elise Weber had learned to listen. Each morning, she walked the same narrow path from her small flat to the Switchboard building. She greeted the guards with a polite nod, passed through the iron doors, and took her place at the end of the long row of desks. Her fingers worked automatically. Plug, connect, switch, release. But her mind listened for meaning behind the words. At first, the gossip she collected had felt accidental. Now it felt deliberate. She was no longer a passive operator. She was a quiet observer in the middle of the storm. That morning, a new name kept repeating across the lines. Operation Rabenflügel. Raven's Wing. It appeared in short, clipped mentions. A supply transfer here, a shipment delay there, no details, only tone, and the tone was tense. She scribbled the word on a scrap of paper and slipped it into her sleeve. That night, she took it to the market. Frau Becker's bakery stall was busy, as usual. The air smelled of rye and smoke. Elise waited until the last customer left, then leaned closer to whisper. "They're preparing something," she said. "They call it raven's wing." The baker didn't flinch. "Do you know what it is?" "No," Elise said, "but everyone sounds afraid." Frau Becker thought for a moment, then nodded. "Fear means importance. We'll find out more." She handed Elise a loaf of bread as usual, but this time it was heavier than it should have been. Inside, Elise later found a folded note sealed with wax. "Keep listening. Your words reach further than you think." The next week, the war began to creep closer to Berlin. The air raid sirens wailed almost every night now, and the sky glowed red from distant fires. People hurried through the streets, carrying gas masks and blankets. Windows were taped in excesses to stop glass from shattering inward. But even as bombs fell, the whispers grew louder. At the switchboard, Elise connected a line between two army offices. Through the static, she caught fragments that made her hands shake. Transfer prisoners from Buchenwald for forced labor, delays on rail lines, tracks damaged near Leipzig, the Eastern Front, impossible conditions. These were things never spoken in public. If said aloud, they could cost a person their life. When her shift ended, Elise copied what she remembered on thin tissue paper, written so small it could be hidden inside a loaf or sewn into a sleeve. She wasn't sure who read it on the other end, but she knew it mattered. One evening, after curfew, there was a soft knock on her apartment door. Elise froze. No one visited her this late. She hesitated, then opened the door a crack. A young man stood there about her age, wearing a wool coat and carrying a small satchel. His face was calm, but his eyes darted around nervously. "Elise Weber," he whispered. She nodded slowly. "I'm a friend of Frau Becker," he said. "My name is Martin. May I come in?" Elise hesitated but stepped aside. The man entered quickly and closed the door behind him. "She said you've been listening," he said softly, "and that you hear what others ignore." Elise felt her pulse quicken. "I don't know what she told you, but I'm just—" He raised a hand. "You're more than that. You've already helped us. The information you passed last week saved a dozen people." Her breath caught. "Saved?" He nodded. "The mention of Raven's Wing. It was a transport schedule. We warned a resistance cell in France. They escaped a raid." Elise sank into her chair. The thought of her quiet words traveling across borders, saving lives, it was overwhelming. "I only pass what I hear," she murmured. "That's all any of us do," Martin said. "The truth moves faster than trains." After that night, Elise no longer worked alone. Through Martin, she learned about others like her, teachers, librarians, even postmen, ordinary people gathering bits of truth. Together they formed a network of whispers that stretched across Germany, unseen but alive. Elise's role was simple: listen, record, pass. But with each secret she uncovered, the weight on her shoulders grew heavier. Sometimes she wondered if she was doing the right thing. The punishment for treason was clear. But every time she saw frightened faces in the market or heard the tremble in a soldier SS voice over the line, she reminded herself, the truth is worth the risk. Then one afternoon, a man from security arrived at the switchboard office. Tall, sharp, eyes like glass. He carried a clipboard and walked down the rows of desks, stopping now and then to ask a question or inspect a headset. When he reached Elise, she looked up, forcing her voice steady. "Good afternoon, sir." He nodded slowly. "You've been here how long, Fräulein Weber?" 2 years. He looked at his papers. "Your record is clean, quiet, no complaints." Then, with a thin smile, he added, "That's good. We need loyal ears." Loyal ears. She smiled politely, but her hands trembled when he walked away. That night, she burned every scrap of paper she had hidden in her apartment. From now on, she decided, everything would stay in her memory. In April, her job became even riskier. New orders required all operators to record certain calls for review. The tapes were kept in a locked cabinet guarded by officers. Elise began memorizing details faster, train routes, names, shipment numbers, before they could disappear into official files. Martin met her only rarely now, always in different places, a tram stop, a park bench, once even inside a church where they spoke under the sound of the organ. "Things are changing," he told her one evening. "The Allies are advancing in Africa. People are starting to doubt, even inside the government." Elise nodded. "And the city? It feels different." "Yes," he said. "The fear is louder now, which means we're close to something." One night, Elise stayed late at the office. The city was quiet under curfew. She connected a final line, an urgent call between Berlin and a coastal command post. Static filled her ear, then a sharp voice. "U-boats cut off. Supplies running low. Losses near Norway. Communications compromised." Elise's heart pounded. This was the kind of information that could shift the entire war effort. She listened carefully, every word pressing deeper into her memory. When the call ended, she sat in silence for a long time. Then she unplugged her headset and whispered to herself, "Even the sea carries rumors now." Outside, the air raid sirens began to wail again. She looked out the window as the lights dimmed across the city. Somewhere out there, people were huddled in shelters, praying for morning. But Elise, sitting in the darkened switchboard room, felt something else, a quiet determination, because she knew the truth had already begun to move faster than fear. And soon those whispers would become voices, and those voices would become a storm. May 10th, 1943. The walls had ears in Berlin, but now Elise Weber began to wonder if the walls had voices too. The war had made everything quieter, not peaceful, just tense. The streets were thinner now, shop windows boarded up, bread was smaller, coffee weaker. But the silence that hung over Berlin was not from hunger alone. It was from fear. And Elise Weber could feel that fear pressing closer every day. She still worked at the same switchboard, still smiled politely, still connected lines between men in uniforms. But the moment her headset touched her ears, she felt the pulse of the city, the secret heartbeat beneath all the orders and reports. Lately, that heartbeat had grown uneven. Something was wrong. The first sign came through a call one afternoon between two staff officers in the Reich Ministry. "See, the investigation is spreading," one said sharply. "They think there's a leak inside the communications division." Elise froze, her pen halfway to the notepad. A leak. Communications. Her department. The second voice replied, "They're checking the switchboards, every operator, every connection log. The Gestapo has a list." Elise's hands went cold. She disconnected as soon as the call ended, forcing her face calm while her mind raced. If they checked the call logs, they might notice something. Irregular hours, odd call lengths, repeated names, even small things could raise suspicion. That evening, when she reached home, she tore apart her room again, every paper, every scrap, every note she had hidden. She burned it all. The smell of smoke filled the air. She whispered to herself, "You can't find what doesn't exist." But that night, as she lay in bed listening to the distant hum of bombers, she thought of Martin. It had been over a week since she last saw him. He was careful with their meetings, always moving, always one step ahead of danger. Still, something inside her worried. At dawn, she went to the market. Frau Becker's stall was closed, the wooden shutters were drawn tight, and a faint chalk mark, a single white X, had been scrawled across the door. Elise's chest tightened. The white X was a signal, not a warning of death, but of silence. Do not return. She turned quickly and walked away, pretending not to notice. But inside, a new kind of fear began to grow, not for herself, but for the others. At the switchboard, tension hung thick in the air. Supervisors moved between desks more often, checking logs, asking questions. One morning, the security officer with the glassy eyes returned. He paced slowly down the aisle, his polished boots clicking against the floor. He stopped beside Elise's desk. "Fräulein Weber," he said quietly. "You've been here some time, yes?" "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice calm. "You know how important loyalty is, don't you?" "Of course." He studied her for a long moment. "Good, because someone here has been disloyal. We will find out who." He smiled thinly and moved on. Only when he was gone did Elise realize she'd been holding her breath. That evening, she slipped into a narrow alley behind an old cinema. It was dark and cold, the air thick with smoke. A soft whistle came from the shadows. "Elise!" Her heart leapt. "Martin!" He stepped out, his coat covered in dust. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered. "They're watching the stations now. Becker was taken 2 days ago." Elise's stomach dropped. "Taken?" He nodded grimly. "She was questioned. They think the leaks came through the market. But she didn't talk. I'm sure of it." Elise felt her throat tighten. "Then they'll come for the rest of us." "Not yet," Martin said. "They don't know your name. You need to stop for a while. No more passing messages." She shook her head. "If I stop, the others lose everything. The network goes silent." He reached for her hand. "Elise, please. One more call in the wrong ear and you're gone. You've done more than enough." But Elise pulled away. "It's not enough. Not yet." The next day, the word "Raven's Wing" appeared again in conversation. Elise almost didn't notice at first. It was just one of many names drifting through the static. But this time, the voices were different. "Transfer complete," one officer said. "The documents are en route to Madrid. Code names confirmed under diplomatic cover." Madrid, neutral territory. Something about it sounded wrong. Elise leaned closer, her pen hovering. Then she caught another word. "Contacts in Lisbon." Lisbon. She had heard that city before. It was one of the main Allied intelligence hubs during the war, where information from inside Germany often surfaced. They're moving something important, she thought. Something the Allies need to know. But there was no Becker now, no safe drop at the market. Only her. That night, Elise met Martin one last time. They stood in the shadows of a bombed-out street, the air filled with the faint crackle of distant fires. She told him everything, the call, the cities, the code name. He listened carefully, then nodded. "I can get it out. We still have a contact near the embassy, but Elise..." He hesitated. "They're going to trace the leaks soon. If they question you, you must not resist. Just act ignorant." She nodded slowly. "And you?" "I'll disappear after this," he said. "It's safer." For a long moment, they stood in silence. Then Martin took her hand, just once, and said, "You've done something extraordinary. Remember that, no matter what happens." And then he was gone. The next morning, the Gestapo came to the office. 2 men in dark coats entered, speaking quietly to the supervisor. Papers were checked. Names were called. Elise sat very still, her fingers tightening around the edges of her desk. Her name was not called. Hours passed like years. Finally, the officers left. But as she exhaled in relief, she noticed one thing. Her supervisor's eyes had flicked toward her for just a second too long. He knew something. That night, Elise didn't go home. She walked instead toward the Eastern District, where the lights were dim and the streets half empty. She found a boarding room under a false name, sitting by the window as the hours dragged on. Through the glass, she watched the city glow with the fires of another raid. She thought of the voices she'd heard, the lives her whispers had saved, the risks others had taken. And she thought of Frau Becker, the kind woman who had risked everything just to pass a message in a loaf of bread. The war was bigger than any of them, but in small corners of the city, ordinary people had done something miraculous. They had told the truth. The next morning, Elise put on her uniform and returned to work as usual, her face calm, her hands steady. No one would ever suspect that the quiet woman at the end of the line had already changed the course of messages crossing Europe. She connected another call, listening to the static rise and fall. Ravenswing, Lisbon. Mission complete. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. Martin made it. The truth had made it. And for Elise, that was enough. June 13, 1943. The war had grown louder, but the truth was still spoken in whispers. Berlin burned again that week. The bombers came at night, black silhouettes against a sky that glowed red from fire. Buildings cracked, sirens wailed, and people ran through the smoke clutching what little they could save. But in the middle of the chaos, in a narrow building untouched by fire, Elise Weber sat at her switchboard, listening. The phone lines had become strange these days, calls cut off mid-sentence. Static grew heavier, as if the city itself didn't want to carry voices anymore. But beneath the distortion, the same human sounds remained. Worry, exhaustion, doubt. For Elise, every tone told a story. And now she was the only one left who knew how to hear them. It had been 3 weeks since the Gestapo raid. Her department still functioned, but fewer desks were filled. People disappeared without farewell, one day working beside her, the next gone as if they'd never existed. Elise didn't ask questions anymore. Questions were dangerous. Listening was safer. At least, that's what she told herself. Then one day, a voice returned from the past. It was a Thursday morning, the air thick with the scent of burnt brick from the night's bombing. Elise connected a line between 2 naval offices. The voices were faint, and one of them sounded oddly familiar. "Transport reached Lisbon successfully," said the man. "No interference. The British won't suspect." Elise froze. That phrase, transport to Lisbon. It was the same code she had passed to Martin, the same one that had saved lives. But now, hearing it again, something sounded wrong. The other voice on the line spoke cautiously. And the source? Still inside Berlin? A pause. Then the first man replied, almost lazily, "Yes, the woman's still useful. She doesn't even know who she's helping." Elise's stomach turned cold. The voice, the tone. She recognized it now. It was Martin. For a moment, everything went silent. The wires, the static, the hum of the switchboard, gone. All Elise could hear was her own heartbeat. She replayed the conversation in her mind, word by word. Martin's calm voice, the talk of the source, the way he said she didn't know who she was helping. Her hands trembled. Could it be true? Had everything... The meetings, the notes, the messages, been a trap? Or was he being forced to say it? She didn't know, but she needed to find out. That evening she left the office early and walked through the city as dusk fell. The streets were dim, scattered with debris from the bombings. She passed lines of weary civilians waiting for water, soldiers directing traffic, nurses carrying supplies. At the corner near the church where she and Martin had once met, she stopped. No one was there, only silence and smoke. She waited an hour, then another. Finally she turned to leave and froze. A figure stepped from the shadows. "Elise," the man said softly. It was Martin. He looked thinner, older, his coat torn, his face hollow, but his eyes, the same eyes that once carried quiet conviction, now looked unsure.
"You shouldn't be here," he whispered. "Neither should you," she replied. For a long moment they said nothing. The sounds of the city filled the gap. Distant sirens, barking dogs, the faint hum of aircraft above. Then Elise spoke. "I heard you today, on the line." He flinched. "You were on that call?" "I was." Her voice was calm but trembling. "You said I was still useful, that I didn't know who I was helping." Martin sighed, looking away. "Elise, it's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." He hesitated. "After Becca was taken, the network fell apart."
"We had to work through new channels. People with connections abroad. Not everyone on our side is clean. I said what I had to keep them from suspecting you." "Do you expect me to believe that?" His voice cracked. "I had no choice. If I hadn't said it, they would have traced the signal back to you. You'd be gone, Elise. Like Becca." Elise wanted to believe him. She really did. But the truth was tangled now, twisted in the wires and buried beneath fear. She turned away. "The truth used to be clear," she whispered. "Now it just echoes." That night, Elise couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard voices, snippets of conversations from months past, rumors she had carried, names she had whispered. She had always believed that truth was her weapon. But now she wasn't sure whose truth she'd been serving. Was she helping the resistance or feeding a false trail? Somewhere, someone was using the same network she'd helped build and twisting it. The next day, Elise returned to the switchboard, her face calm, her hands steady. But inside, she was searching. Every line she connected, every coded phrase she overheard. She listened for him, for Martin. She found traces, small ones, mentions of contacts in Lisbon, messages confirmed, the source in Berlin. The words followed her like shadows. By evening, she'd made her decision. If she couldn't tell which side was right, she would stop helping either. From now on, she would listen only to protect lives, not to serve plans she couldn't see. Weeks passed, the bombings grew worse, and the high command became desperate. Orders flew across lines faster than ever. Some were contradictory, others panicked. Elise could hear it in their voices. The empire was cracking. One afternoon, during a long stretch of calls, she heard something that made her blood run cold. "Communications officer in Berlin suspected of subversive activity," said a man's voice. "We have a name. Weber." Her name. She quickly disconnected the line and looked around. No one had noticed. The other operators were busy, their heads bent over their boards. She stood up, calm, collected, and walked out of the building without looking back. That night, the city burned again. Flames climbed into the sky as sirens screamed. Elise moved through the chaos with only a small satchel, a few papers, her identification, and one final letter she'd written to herself. "If truth has a cost, then I have already paid it." But let the world remember that even in darkness, someone tried to listen. She didn't know where she would go, and maybe the countryside, maybe a safe house Martin had once mentioned. But she knew one thing: she couldn't stay. The wires that once carried secrets were no longer safe. The static had become louder than the truth. As she crossed the bridge over the Spree River, the lights of Berlin flickered behind her, a city of whispers built on silence and fear. She stopped and looked back once, her face pale in the glow of firelight. Then she turned away, walking into the darkness, her footsteps fading with the sound of distant sirens. Somewhere in the static, her story still travelled, carried by the same invisible lines that had once betrayed her. And though she would vanish into history, her whispers would remain, because even in war, truth has an echo. April 20th, 1945, Berlin was falling, and the phones wouldn't stop ringing. The war had come home. Gunfire cracked through the streets, and the air smelled of smoke and dust. The once proud capital was now a hollow shell. Buildings shattered, soldiers exhausted, civilians moving like ghosts between ruins. In what remained of the communications office, the switchboard still hummed. Power flickered on and off, wires dangled from the ceiling, and the once steady rhythm of operators' voices had dissolved into chaos. And in the middle of it all sat Elise Weber, the woman who had once listened for whispers, now surrounded by the roar of collapse. For months she had been hiding under a false name, working quietly at a small station on the city's edge. She had thought her part in the war was over, but now, as the Allied forces closed in, the old network had reactivated. Lines that had been silent for months crackled back to life. Desperate voices calling for orders, for help, for mercy. She could have walked away, but something inside her wouldn't let her. Maybe it was duty. Maybe guilt. Or maybe the quiet belief that even in a dying city, truth still mattered. That morning, she arrived at the office before dawn. The operator on duty, a young boy barely 17, greeted her with a nod and hurried off to fetch water from the ration line. Elise sat down, put on her headset, and began connecting calls. The rhythm came back like muscle memory. Plug, click, connect. A voice broke through the static. Command post, this is Central, confirming evacuation routes through Tiergarten. The line cut out. Another voice followed. Repeat, Central. Do you copy? We're surrounded. Static swallowed the rest. She worked faster, switching lines, rerouting connections. Through the chaos, one faint signal caught her attention, a low, rhythmic pulse between the noise. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, Morse code, SOS. Her breath caught. Someone was sending a distress signal through the civilian network, something strictly forbidden. She adjusted the dials, isolating the channel. The signal repeated, faint but steady. Then came a voice. If anyone can hear this, this is Martin. Please, someone respond. Elise froze. She hadn't heard his voice in nearly 2 years. For a long moment she didn't move. Her hands hovered over the controls, her heart pounding in her chest. Finally, she whispered into the transmitter. Martin, this is Elise. Static crackled, then a sigh of disbelief. Elise? My God, you're alive? I thought you were dead, she said softly. I almost was, he replied. They caught me last year. Not the Gestapo, the Russians. I escaped when the front moved. I've been working with an Allied interpreter unit. We're inside the city now. Elise, listen. We're trying to find a way to stop a final order. What order? He hesitated. The High Command plans to destroy what's left of the city. Bridges, railways, anything that could help the Allies. They want to bury Berlin under itself. We're trying to reach an officer who can stop it. Elise looked around the dark room. The tangled wires, the flickering lamps, the sound of distant artillery shaking the windows. She whispered, "Tell me what you need." For the next hour, she worked the switchboard like a conductor leading an orchestra. Through half-dead circuits and broken lines, she patched connections between resistance cells, Allied scouts, and a few frightened German officers who had lost faith in their orders. Every voice carried urgency. Every word felt like a race against time. Outside, the explosions drew closer. The walls trembled, dust falling from the ceiling. But Elise didn't stop. Her fingers moved faster and faster, pulling cables, adjusting frequencies. The static hissed in her ears like a storm. Finally, she heard Martin again. "Elise, we found him. He's agreed. We just need confirmation that the demolition teams stand down. Can you patch through to Command Section 14B? "I can try," she said. She switched lines. Once, twice, 3 times, until she reached a faint, wavering signal. "This is Section 14B, a man's voice answered. Elise spoke carefully, her tone firm. "This is Central Relay, urgent message from Colonel Strauss. All demolition orders are suspended effective immediately. Confirm receipt." Silence. Then, confirmed. Orders received. She exhaled, her hands trembling. Outside, the gunfire slowed. The rumble of explosions stopped. Through the broken window, Elise could see smoke still rising from the city, but not spreading, not anymore. The final order had been stopped. Martin's voice came through one last time. "Elise, you did it!" Tears filled her eyes. "No," she whispered. "We did." Then the line went dead. Hours passed. The city was quiet now, eerily so. The young boy never returned. The office was empty, except for the hum of the switchboard and the faint smell of burning wires. Elise sat in the dark, listening to the silence she had once feared. For years she had carried rumors, secrets, and lies, believing that truth could travel through the same wires as deceit. Now in the end, her final message had been simple: stop the destruction. And somehow, it had worked. As dawn broke, she left the building for the last time. The streets were filled with rubble, and the first Allied tanks rolled through the smoke. Civilians watched silently, unsure if they were witnessing defeat or salvation. Elise walked among them, her coat dusty, her eyes clear. No one noticed her. No one would remember her name, but that didn't matter. She had been the voice behind the lines, the unseen listener who turned whispers into warnings and gossip into resistance. In a world built on lies, she had chosen to listen for truth. She reached the edge of the city and looked back. The skyline of Berlin, shattered but still standing, glowed faintly in the morning light. For a moment she imagined the wires running beneath the streets. Silent now, but once alive with voices. She smiled faintly. "It's over," she whispered, and for the first time in years she believed it. In the end, wars are not won only by soldiers or generals, but by those who dare to hear what others ignore. Elise Weber was never given a medal, never written into history books, yet through her quiet courage, a city was spared. Her story reminds us that even in the darkest times, one voice can still make a difference.